The air smelled of fresh-baked cookies and regret. Elliot stood frozen in the middle of the Costco aisle, his cart half filled with practical things, paper towels, almond milk, a jumbo pack of batteries, while his heart screamed for something reckless. At 28, he'd spent years perfecting the art of blending in, but today, the weight of his own invisibility felt suffocating. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not really. His sister, Mara, had begged him to handle her shopping list while she was stuck at work, and Elliot, ever the dutiful brother, had agreed. Now, surrounded by the hum of shoppers and the relentless cheer of warehouse deals, he felt like a ghost drifting through someone else's life. Atlanta's summer heat clung to his skin, even inside the air-conditioned sprawl of the store, and he tugged at his faded t-shirt, wishing he'd worn something less forgettable. That's when he saw him. Marcus stood behind a small sample station, a beacon of warmth in the sterile sea of bulk goods. His apron was slightly askew, his dark curls peeking out from under a Costco cap. And his smile, God, that smile, could have sold 1,000 trays of mini quiches. He was offering samples of some gourmet cheese dip, his voice smooth as he chatted with a passing family, his hands moving with an easy confidence that made Elliot's chest tighten. Marcus wasn't just a sample guy. He was a moment. Care to try some smoked Gouda dip? Marcus called out, catching Elliot's eye. His voice was low, playful, like he knew a secret Elliot hadn't figured out yet. Elliot froze, his grip tightening on the cart handle. He wasn't hungry, not for food at least, but something about Marcus's gaze pulled him closer, like gravity. Sure, Elliot mumbled, stepping forward. His sneakers squeaked on the polished floor, and he cringed at the sound. Marcus handed him a small cracker topped with a swirl of creamy dip, their fingers brushing for the briefest second. Elliot's breath hitched. It was nothing, he told himself. Just a sample, just a moment. But Marcus's eyes lingered. First time trying this one? He asked, leaning slightly over the table, his voice dropping just enough to feel personal. Elliot nodded, popping the cracker into his mouth. The smoky flavor hit his tongue, sharp and unexpected, but it was Marcus's attention that left him dizzy. It's good, he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Good. Marcus raised an eyebrow, his grin teasing. Man, you gotta give me more than that. This dip's my masterpiece. Elliot laughed, surprising himself. Okay, fine. It's really good. Like, I'd buy a tub of it and eat it alone in my apartment good. Marcus's laugh was warm, unguarded, and it lit something inside Elliot he hadn't felt in years. That's more like it. I'm Marcus, by the way. Elliot, he replied, his name feeling clumsy in his mouth. He wasn't used to being seen. Not like this. Not by someone who looked at him like he was more than a passing shadow. They talked for longer than they should have. Marcus shared stories about his side gig as a musician, his dreams of playing jazz in smoky bars, while Elliot admitted he was a graphic designer who spent most of his days tweaking logos for clients he'd never meet. The conversation flowed too easily, like they'd known each other forever, and Elliot forgot about the shopping list, the ticking clock, the world beyond the sample station. But then a manager appeared, her clipboard clutched like a weapon. Marcus, let's keep the line moving, she said, her tone clipped. Marcus shot her a sheepish grin, then turned back to Elliot. Guess I gotta get back to work, he said, but his eyes said something else, something like don't go. He slipped Elliot another cracker, this one with an extra dollop of dip. Come back for seconds, yeah? Elliot nodded, his heart pounding as he pushed his cart away. He didn't know it yet, but that tiny cracker was the first taste of something he'd never forget. He wandered the aisles, Mara's list forgotten in his pocket. His mind kept circling back to Marcus, the way his hands moved, the way his voice felt like a melody. Elliot had spent so long hiding who he was, burying his feelings under layers of caution. Growing up in a small Georgia town, he learned early that being openly gay wasn't just risky, it was dangerous. Even now, in the relative safety of Atlanta, he kept his guard up, his life small and controlled. But Marcus was different. He was bold, unapologetic, the kind of person who wore his truth like a badge. And for the first time in years, Elliot wanted to be brave too. He looped back toward the sample station, his pulse racing. Marcus was still there, handing out samples to a new wave of shoppers. But when he saw Elliot, his face lit up. "Back for more?" he asked, his tone teasing but soft. "Maybe," Elliot said, trying to match Marcus's ease. "Or maybe I just wanted to see if you're as good with other samples." Marcus's grin widened. "Challenge accepted. Meet me at the Pizza Rolls in 10. Elliot's heart stuttered. Was this a date? A flirtation? He didn't know, but he nodded anyway, the word yes slipping out before he could overthink it. 10 minutes later, they were side by side at another sample station, this time with tiny pizza rolls steaming on a tray. Marcus handed one to Elliot, their fingers brushing again, and the air between them crackled. They talked about everything and nothing. Music, movies, the way Atlanta's skyline looked at dusk. Elliot felt like he was waking up, like the world was suddenly in color. But then Marcus's break ended, and reality crashed back in. "I'm here till closing," Marcus said, his voice tinged with regret. "But, you got a pen?" Elliot fumbled in his pocket, handing over a crumpled receipt and a pen. Marcus scribbled something on it. A phone number. "Call me," he said, his eyes serious now. "I mean it." Elliot clutched the receipt like it was a lifeline as he walked away, his cart still half empty. He didn't know what this was, but he knew it was more than a sample. It was a spark, a chance, a taste of something real. And he wasn't ready to let it go. Elliot's apartment was a shrine to routine. Beige walls, a second-hand couch, a desk cluttered with sketches he never showed anyone. But tonight, as he sat on the edge of his bed, Marcus's phone number burned a hole in his pocket. The crumpled receipt lay on his nightstand, its edges frayed from how many times he'd unfolded and refolded. He wanted to call God. He wanted to, but fear was a heavy anchor, chaining him to the familiar. He'd spent years building a life that didn't draw attention. After coming out to his parents at 19, he'd faced their silence, their disappointment, their insistence that he could choose differently. He hadn't spoken to them in years, not since he'd moved to Atlanta to start over. Friends were few, mostly co-workers who didn't know the real him. Elliot had learned to keep his heart small, safe, locked away. But Marcus had cracked that lock without even trying. Elliot's phone buzzed, snapping him out of his spiral. A text from Mara. "Did you get the stuff?" He glanced at the grocery bags on his kitchen counter, half unpacked. He'd forgotten half her list, too distracted by Marcus's smile. Mostly, he texted back, guilt creeping in. Mara didn't know he was gay. She'd never asked, and he'd never told her. It was easier that way. He picked up the receipt again, his thumb tracing Marcus's handwriting. The numbers were bold, confident like Marcus himself. Before he could talk himself out of it, Elliot typed the number into his phone and hit call. It rang twice before Marcus answered. "Yo, is this my Gouda-dip guy?" His voice was warm, teasing, and Elliot's nerves melted a little. Yeah, it's Elliot," he said, cringing at how awkward he sounded. You said to call." "Damn right I did," Marcus replied, and Elliot could hear the grin in his voice. "You free tomorrow night?" "I'm off, and there's this jazz spot downtown I've been dying to check out." Elliot's heart leapt. A date. This was a date. "Yeah, I'm free," he said too quickly. "I mean, that sounds cool." "Cool," Marcus echoed, his tone soft. "Meet me at the Blue Note at 8. And Elliot, don't overthink it." The call ended, and Elliot sat there, staring at his phone, a mix of terror and excitement churning in his chest. He hadn't been on a date in years, not since a few fumbling hookups in college that left him feeling emptier than before. But Marcus was different. He was real. The next evening, Elliot stood outside the Blue Note, a small jazz club tucked between towering office buildings. Atlanta's skyline glowed against the night, and the air was thick with the scent of street food and possibility. He'd agonized over his outfit, settling on a navy button-down and jeans that made him feel slightly less invisible. His palms were sweaty as he scanned the crowd for Marcus. Then he saw him, leaning against a lamppost, wearing a fitted black shirt and a smile that could stop traffic. "You made it," Marcus said, his eyes lighting up as he walked over. "Thought you might chicken out." "Almost did," Elliot admitted, and they both laughed, the tension easing. Inside, the club was alive with the hum of saxophones and the clink of glasses. They found a table near the stage, and as the music swirled around them, Marcus leaned closer, his knee brushing Elliot's under the table. They talked about everything. Marcus's childhood in New Orleans, his love for jazz, the way he'd ended up at Costco after his band fell apart. Elliot shared pieces of himself, too, hesitant at first, then freer. His art, his dreams of designing something that mattered, the weight of his family's rejection. "You ever think about reaching out to them?" Marcus asked, his voice gentle but probing. "Your family, I mean." Elliot's throat tightened. "Sometimes, but they made it clear they don't want me. Not the real me." Marcus's hand rested on the table, inches from Elliot's. "Their loss," he said, his eyes steady. "You're worth knowing, Elliot." The words hit harder than they should have. Elliot looked away, his chest aching with something he couldn't name. The music swelled, a trumpet solo that felt like it was pulling his heart open. And when he looked back, Marcus was watching him, his gaze soft but intense. They stayed until the last note faded, then spilled out onto the street, the night air cool against their skin. Marcus walked Elliot to his car, their shoulders brushing as they navigated the crowded sidewalk. At the car, Marcus paused, his expression unreadable. "I had a good time," he said, stepping closer. "You?" "Yeah." Elliot breathed, his heart racing. "Really good." Marcus's hand brushed his arm, a fleeting touch that sent sparks through Elliot's veins. "Call me again," Marcus said, his voice low. "I'm not done with you yet." Elliot drove home in a daze, the taste of jazz and Marcus's words lingering like a song he couldn't shake. The next week was a blur of texts and stolen moments. Marcus would send Elliot random messages, a meme about cheese dip, a link to a jazz playlist, a selfie from the Costco break room that made Elliot's heart skip. Each one felt like a lifeline, pulling him out of his carefully controlled world and into something brighter, riskier. But doubt was a stubborn shadow. Elliot couldn't shake the fear that this, whatever it was, would end like everything else. He'd built walls for a reason, and Marcus was tearing them down faster than he could rebuild. What if Marcus got bored? What if Elliot wasn't enough? He was still wrestling with those thoughts when Mara invited him to dinner. "You've been weird lately," she said over the phone, her tone half teasing, half concerned. "Come over. I'm making lasagna." Mara's apartment was the opposite of Elliot's, bright, cluttered, full of photos and plants and life. She was 3 years older, a nurse with a laugh that could fill a room, and she'd always been his safe harbor. But as they sat at her kitchen table, lasagna steaming between them, Elliot felt the weight of his secret pressing down. "So," Mara said, cutting into her food, "what's got you so distracted? You barely touched the Costco stuff I asked for." Elliot's fork paused midair. "Just work," he lied, hating how easily it came out. Mara raised an eyebrow. "Bull, you're acting like you're in love or something." Elliot choked on his water, his face burning. Mara laughed, but her eyes softened. "Wait, are you?" "Spill, little brother." He wanted to tell her. He wanted to say Marcus's name, to share the way his heart raced every time his phone lit up with a new text. But the words stuck in his throat, heavy with years of fear. What if Mara didn't understand? What if she looked at him the way their parents had? "I'm not in love," he said finally, his voice quiet. "Just met someone. Maybe." Mara's smile was gentle. "Okay, when you're ready to talk, I'm here." The rest of dinner passed in a haze, and when Elliot left, he felt more alone than ever. He pulled out his phone, staring at Marcus's last text. "You free this weekend? Got a surprise for you." His thumb hovered over the reply button, but he didn't type anything. Not yet. Saturday came, and Marcus's surprise turned out to be a picnic at Piedmont Park. They spread a blanket under a sprawling oak, the Atlantis skyline shimmering in the distance. Marcus had packed sandwiches, fruit, and, because of course he did, a tub of that smoked Gouda dip. They ate and laughed, the air warm with summer and possibility. "You're quiet today," Marcus said, leaning back on his elbows, his eyes searching Elliot's face. "Everything okay?" Elliot hesitated. He wanted to be honest, to tell Marcus about the fear that kept him up at night, but the words felt too big. Instead, he said, "Just thinking about family. Mine's complicated." Marcus nodded, his expression soft. "Mine too. My dad didn't take it well when I came out. Took years for him to come around. But he did, eventually." Elliot's breath caught. It was the first time Marcus had mentioned being gay, and the casual way he said it, like it was just a fact, not a confession, made Elliot's heart ache. "How'd you do it?" he asked. "Just be so okay with it." Marcus shrugged, but his eyes were serious. "Wasn't always. Took time. And people like you, who make it feel worth it." Elliot's throat tightened, and before he could stop himself, he leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their lips met, soft and tentative at first, then deeper, hungrier. The world fell away, the park, the city, the fear. There was only Marcus, warm and real, his hands cupping Elliot's face like he was something precious. When they pulled back, Elliot's heart was pounding, his mind reeling. "I've never," he started, then stopped, embarrassed. Marcus's smile was gentle. "First time kissing a guy in public?" Elliot nodded, his face burning. "First time kissing anyone in a while." "Then I'm honored," Marcus said, his voice low. He brushed a thumb across Elliot's cheek, and the tenderness of it nearly broke him. They spent the rest of the afternoon tangled in each other, talking and kissing and laughing until the sun dipped low. But as they packed up, Elliot's phone buzzed. A text from Mara. "Mom called. She wants to see us." The words hit like a punch. Elliot stared at the screen, his heart sinking. He hadn't spoken to his mother in years, not since the fight that had driven him away. What did she want now? And why did it feel like the past was clawing its way back, just when he'd found something worth holding on to? Elliot's hands shook as he read Mara's text again. His mother. After all this time, why now? He shoved his phone into his pocket, trying to focus on Marcus, who was folding the picnic blanket with an easy grace. But the weight of the message clung to him, heavy as the Georgia humidity. "You okay?" Marcus asked, slinging the blanket over his shoulder. His eyes were sharp, catching the shift in Elliot's mood. "Yeah," Elliot lied, forcing a smile. "Just family stuff." Marcus didn't push, but his hand brushed Elliot's as they walked back to the car, a quiet anchor. They drove in comfortable silence, Marcus's jazz playlist filling the space between them. When they reached Elliot's apartment, Marcus leaned over, kissing him softly. "Call me if you need me," he said, his voice steady. "I'm here." Elliot nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Alone in his apartment, he sank onto the couch, Mara's text glowing on his phone. He didn't want to face his mother, not after the way she'd looked at him when he came out, her words sharp as knives. "This isn't who you are, Elliot. You're confused." The memory still burned, and he wasn't sure he could survive it again. But Mara was insistent. The next day, she called, her voice bright but firm. "She's in town, Elliot. Just for a few days. She wants to see us both. Dinner tomorrow night." "I can't," Elliot said, his voice flat. "I'm busy." "Bullshit," Mara shot back. "You're scared. I get it. But she's our mom, and she's trying. Give her a chance." Elliot wanted to argue, but Mara's tone left no room for it. So he agreed, dread pooling in his stomach. That night, he texted Marcus, needing his warmth to ground him. "Can we meet up? Need to talk." They met at a quiet coffee shop, the kind with mismatched chairs and the scent of roasted beans. Marcus listened as Elliot poured out his fears, his mother's rejection, the years of silence, the way it had shaped him into someone who hid rather than lived. Marcus didn't interrupt, just held his hand under the table, his thumb tracing slow circles on Elliot's skin. You don't have to go, Marcus said when Elliot finished. But if you do, you're not that kid anymore. You're stronger than you think. Elliot wanted to believe him, but the fear was a living thing clawing at his chest. What if she hasn't changed? He whispered. Then you walk away, Marcus said, his voice firm. But you'll know you tried, and you'll still have me. The words were a lifeline, and Elliot clung to them. They spent the rest of the evening together, Marcus's laughter pulling him out of the dark. When they parted, Marcus kissed him fiercely, like he was pouring courage into him. You got this, he said, and I've got you. Dinner was at a chain restaurant, the kind with generic decor and too bright lighting. Mara was already there, chatting easily with their mother, Linda, who looked older than Elliot remembered, her hair grayer, her eyes tired. When she saw Elliot, she stood, her smile hesitant. Elliot, she said, her voice soft. You came. He nodded, his throat tight. They sat, the air thick with unspoken history. Mara carried the conversation, talking about her job, her new apartment, anything to fill the silence. But Linda's eyes kept drifting to Elliot, and finally, she spoke. I've missed you, she said, her voice cracking. I wasn't fair to you. I didn't understand, and I'm sorry. Elliot's fork froze in his hand. He'd waited years for those words, but now they felt too small, too late. You didn't just not understand, he said, his voice low. You told me I was wrong, that I wasn't your son anymore. Linda's face crumpled, and Mara reached for her hand, but Elliot didn't stop. Do you know what that did to me? I spent years hiding, Mom. Years thinking I wasn't enough. I know, Linda whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. I was wrong. I was scared, and I hurt you. I want to make it right. Elliot's chest ached, torn between anger and the desperate need to believe her. He didn't know if he could forgive her. Not yet. But her words were a crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. He left the dinner feeling raw, like a wound had been reopened. He drove to Marcus's apartment without thinking, needing his steadiness. Marcus opened the door, took one look at Elliot's face, and pulled him into a hug. They didn't speak, just held each other, the silence saying more than words could. I don't know if I can do this, Elliot said finally, his voice muffled against Marcus's shoulder. You don't have to decide now, Marcus murmured, but you're not alone anymore. They stayed like that, tangled together, until Elliot's breathing steadied. For the first time, he felt like he could face the past. Not because it was fixed, but because Marcus was there, a reminder that he was worth loving. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance. Elliot and Marcus fell into a rhythm. Late-night talks, stolen kisses, weekend spent exploring Atlanta's hidden corners. Marcus introduced Elliot to his world. Open mic nights where he played saxophone, hole-in-the-wall diners with the best fried chicken, quiet moments where they'd sit on his balcony and watch the city pulse. Each moment felt like a gift, a taste of a life Elliot had never dared to imagine. But his mother's apology lingered, a question he couldn't answer. He met her again, at Mara's urging, this time for coffee. It was awkward, stilted, but Linda tried. She asked about his work, his life, carefully avoiding the past. Elliot answered in short sentences, his guard still up, but he didn't walk away. Not yet. One night, as they lay in Marcus's bed, the city lights spilling through the window, Elliot told him about it. She's trying, he said, his voice soft. But I don't know if I can trust it. Marcus propped himself up on one elbow, his eyes searching Elliot's face. You don't have to. Not until you're ready. But you're giving her a chance, and that's more than most people would do. Elliot traced the curve of Marcus's jaw, marveling at how easy it felt to be close to him. How do you do that? He asked. Make everything sound so simple. Marcus laughed, low and warm. It's not simple, but you make me want to try. Their relationship deepened, each moment building on the last. But the world wasn't always kind. One evening, as they walked hand in hand through Little Five Points, a group of guys shouted slurs from a passing car. Elliot froze, his heart pounding, but Marcus squeezed his hand, his jaw tight. Ignore them, he said, his voice steady. They don't get to ruin this. But the words lingered, a reminder of the world's sharp edges. Elliot felt the old fear creeping back, the instinct to hide. He pulled his hand away, shoving it into his pocket, and Marcus's face fell. "You okay?" Marcus asked, his voice gentle but laced with worry. I don't know how to do this," Elliot admitted, his voice breaking. "Be out. Be us. Not when people look at us like that." Marcus stopped walking, turning to face him. "I get it. I do. But I'm not going anywhere, Elliot. Not unless you tell me to." Elliot wanted to believe him, but the fear was a living thing clawing at his chest. They walked back to Marcus's apartment in silence, the space between them heavy with unspoken words. The next day, Elliot threw himself into work, sketching logos until his eyes burned. But his mind kept drifting to Marcus, to the way he'd looked at him last night, hurt but patient. He knew he was pulling away, retreating to the safety of his old walls, but he didn't know how to stop. That evening, Marcus texted, "Got a gig tonight. Want to come?" Elliot hesitated, his thumb hovering over the screen. He wanted to say yes, to lose himself in Marcus's music, but the memory of those slurs held him back. He didn't go. Instead, he stayed home, staring at the sketches on his desk, lifeless, uninspired. He thought of Marcus on stage, his saxophone singing, his heart open to the world. And he thought of himself, hiding again, letting fear win. The guilt was crushing. He picked up his phone, typing a message to Marcus. "I'm sorry. I freaked out. Can we talk?" Marcus's reply came quickly. "Always. Come over." Elliot arrived at Marcus's apartment just as the city was settling into night. Marcus opened the door, his face soft but serious. "You scared me last night," he said, stepping aside to let Elliot in. "Thought I was losing you." "I'm scared too," Elliot admitted, his voice raw. "I want this us so bad it hurts. But I don't know how to be brave like you." Marcus pulled him close, his arm steady. "You're braver than you think. You're here, aren't you?" They talked for hours, peeling back layers of fear and hope. Elliot told Marcus about the years he'd spent hiding, the loneliness that had become his default. Marcus shared his own struggles, growing up in a family that didn't always accept him, fighting to carve out a space where he could be himself. By the time the sun rose, Elliot felt lighter, like he'd shed a weight he'd carried for years. He didn't have all the answers, but he had Marcus, and that was enough for now. The turning point came unexpectedly. Elliot had agreed to meet Marcus at Costco during his shift, a playful return to where it all began. The store was as chaotic as ever, shoppers swarming the aisles, but Marcus's sample station was an island of calm. He was handing out tiny cups of smoothie, his smile as bright as the first day they'd met. "Back for more," Marcus teased, handing Elliot a cup. Their fingers brushed, and Elliot felt that familiar spark. "Always," he said, matching Marcus's grin. They bantered between customers, stealing moments of connection amidst the chaos. But then a man approached, middle-aged, broad-shouldered, his face set in a scowl. "You too," he said, his voice loud enough to draw eyes. "This ain't the place for that." Elliot's heart sank, his old instincts screaming at him to shrink, to disappear. But Marcus didn't flinch. He stepped closer to Elliot, his voice calm but firm. "We're just talking, man. Keep moving." The man muttered something ugly under his breath, but walked away, and Elliot's knees felt weak with relief. Marcus turned to him, his eyes fierce. "You okay?" Elliot nodded, but he was shaking. Marcus reached for his hand, right there in the middle of Costco, and held it tight. "You don't have to hide," he said, his voice low. "Not with me." Something shifted in Elliot then, a crack in the armor he'd worn for so long. He squeezed Marcus's hand, his heart pounding but steady. "I don't want to," he said, and for the first time he meant it. That night, Elliot told Mara everything. They sat on her couch, a bottle of wine between them, and the words poured out. Marcus, the fear, the hope, the love he was starting to let himself feel. Mara listened, her eyes wide, then pulled him into a hug. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I love you, Elliot. All of you." Her words were a balm, healing wounds he hadn't realized were still open. He cried, and she held him, and for the first time in years, he felt like he belonged. The next week, Marcus invited Elliot to meet his friends, a tight-knit group of musicians and artists who gathered at a loft downtown. Elliot was nervous, his old fears whispering that he wouldn't fit in, but Marcus's hand in his was a steady anchor. The night was a blur of laughter, music, and warmth, and Elliot found himself relaxing, his walls crumbling with every smile, every story. "You're one of us now," one of Marcus's friends, a drummer named Lila, said with a grin. "No escaping." Elliot laughed, his heart full. He looked at Marcus, who was watching him with a quiet pride, and realized he didn't want to escape. Not anymore. But the past wasn't done with him. Linda called again, asking to meet one last time before she left Atlanta. Elliot agreed, his stomach churning with nerves. They met at a park, the air crisp with early fall. Linda looked smaller than he remembered, her hands twisting in her lap. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, her voice trembling. "But I want you to know I'm trying to understand. I want to be part of your life, if you'll let me." Elliot's throat tightened. He thought of Marcus, of Mara, of the life he was building. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet," he said honestly, "but I'm willing to try." Linda's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. "That's enough," she whispered. "For now, that's enough." They parted with a tentative hug, and Elliot felt a weight lift, not gone but lighter. He drove to Marcus's apartment, needing to see him, to share this fragile hope. Marcus was waiting, his arms open, and Elliot fell into them, the taste of possibility sweeter than anything he'd ever known. Months later, Elliot stood in the same Costco aisle where it all began. The store was decked out for the holidays, twinkling lights strung above the towering shelves, and the air smelled of cinnamon and pine. Marcus was at his sample station, handing out gingerbread cookies, his smile as bright as ever. But this time, Elliot wasn't just a nervous shopper with a list he'd forgotten. He was someone new, someone who belonged. Their relationship had grown, deepening with every shared moment. They'd faced challenges, Elliot's lingering fears, Marcus's demanding gigs, the world's occasional cruelty, but they'd faced them together. Marcus had taught Elliot how to stand tall, and Elliot had shown Marcus the quiet strength of vulnerability. Today, they had plans. Marcus's band had landed a big gig at a jazz festival, and Elliot was designing the posters, his art finally reflecting the vibrancy he felt inside. They were building a life, not perfect but real, and it was more than Elliot had ever dreamed possible. As Marcus's shift ended, he waved Elliot over, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "Got one last sample for you," he said, holding out a gingerbread cookie. But instead of handing it over, he dropped to one knee, right there in the middle of Costco, the crowd parting around them. Elliot's breath caught. "Marcus, watch. I'm not proposing," Marcus said quickly, his grin wide. "Not yet, but I want you to know I'm all in, Elliot. You're my home, my muse, my everything. So, will you keep building this life with me?" The words were a melody, sweet and steady, and Elliot's eyes filled with tears. He nodded, unable to speak, and pulled Marcus to his feet, kissing him fiercely as shoppers cheered and clapped. The world didn't disappear, but it didn't matter. They were enough. They left Costco hand in hand, the taste of gingerbread and love lingering on Elliot's lips. He thought of the boy he'd been, scared, hidden, alone, and marveled at the man he'd become. Marcus had given him more than a sample that first day. He'd given him a spark, a chance, a life worth living. And Elliot would never forget the taste.